completely justify what the British did. Let's get in it.
The American Revolution was the seminal moment of the 18th century. It was the culmination of the Enlightenment and would usher in an era of change and revolution. However, it was never intended to become so. That a dispute over taxes would escalate into an era-defining war shocked everyone involved and forever changed the fate of both the new and old worlds. Welcome to the beginning of our series on the American Revolution, where we will tell the tale of miscommunication, misunderstanding, and missed opportunities that led to the birth of a nation. Technically, all this began when someone in Europe figured you could get to Asia by going around the back of the world. The world is round after all, and at least they...
Okay, this is a sponsor. I am poor, so I say this in all of my videos. I am poor. I have no donation set up, so I'm just gonna skip.
The fundamental underlying problem that led to war between Britain and her colonial subjects was communication. A message sent from North America to Europe on a typical sailing ship of the 17th and 18th century would arrive in about a month, assuming calm seas, favourable winds, and correct navigation. Anything less added weeks, if not months, to a voyage. Additionally, the North Atlantic trade winds are westerly, meaning the return trip would take at least twice as long, as ships either had to tack into the wind for a direct return or sail down to Africa to catch the easterly equatorial winds. Therefore, in a crisis, local authorities in the Americas would be on their own for no less than 3 months before British authorities arrived on the scene.
Bro, how in the world? How in the hell did people even survive like this, bro? Granted, they like live off the land. It's like, it's amazing to me how we want to colonize Mars, we want to colonize space, and it's gonna be like that, bro. Like imagine if we colonize people. Holy crap, they're gonna be on a whole different planet for months, hell, even a year. So it's basically like the same thing when you think about it. Oof. But the only difference is that different planets, they're not like habitable, right? Because freaking Elon Musk wants to colonize Mars. Oof. I hope I get to witness that before I die.
Great Britain solved this problem by barely trying to govern its colonies at all. Instead, it handed charters to establish colonies along with government powers.
Smart. British colonization was smart. Okay, that's why every country that was a British colony, on average, does better than every other country that was not a British colony.
Rights of Englishmen and land grants to private individuals and/or joint stock companies. Except for a failed attempt to centralise control and administration in New England, London barely interfered in colonial affairs. It didn't have the resources to pay appointed governors or station troops in every colony, nor any desire to. This suited the colonists, who were left to manage their own affairs via elected legislatures. London didn't even attempt to enforce the Mercantilist Navigation Acts. This period, known as salutary neglect, lasted 70 years. London's neglect wasn't simply sloth. The 13 colonies just weren't valuable enough as colonies to bother closely governing.
Yes, bro. Okay, so my country, Barbados, right? It was discovered by the English in 1622, and Barbados became the third richest colony in the New World, right? And because of that, the British freaking guarded Barbados to the T, fam. My home city, Bridgetown, even got the nickname like Fortress Bridgetown because the British like firmly had grasp on it. Freaking hell, fam. Yeah, the 30 colonies were not profitable. Back then, it was the Caribbean that was profitable. I'm not saying that because I'm from the Caribbean. I'm saying that because that's true. But yeah, true. Because in the Caribbean, things were way different.
The revenue generated by the 13 colonies paled in comparison to the fur trade centered on Canada's Great Lakes and Hudson's Bay. Canada in turn paled next to the Caribbean sugar colony, which accounted for 4% of Britain's total gross national product. Therefore, London prioritised protecting the Caribbean and Canadian colonies over the American ones. It was rare for the total number of army regulars in North America to exceed 4,000 during peacetime. Most were stationed to protect trading posts and
Dude, I think he might Barbados. There's like 40 forts. Around like 40 forts. And the British built so many forts on Barbados, dude. Because freaking, like, Barbados is money. Freaking money, man. White gold, produce all that sugar, man. Hell, I'm glad that he brought that up, okay? Because kings and generals, they can be very inaccurate. And when I was like getting into this reaction, I was thinking to myself that, okay, he might be a bit more American narrative, and he's probably gonna like paint out the 13 colonies as this most important thing. Even though that's not true, the 13 colonies were barely profitable. I think only like New York was profitable, I think. And even then, that wasn't even like a British colony. That was a Dutch colony, but the freaking British took it. But yeah, but okay, I trust kings and generals a little bit more.
deter the French in Canada. The rest were scattered in frontier forts and small coastal garrisons, with New York as the army's headquarters. Local forces were the primary protection for the American colonies against raids by the French and their indigenous allies. The 1754 French and Indian War changed everything. Facing a reinforced and aggressive New France and its allied tribes, representatives from the 7 northern colonies met in Albany on June 19th to plan their war strategy. Also in attendance were representatives of the Iroquois Confederacy, whose continued alliance against the French the colonists were desperate to secure. Despite the delegates' efforts, the Iroquois couldn't actually commit to fighting the French.
You know what I find funny? I find funny how French colonization, right? Like, French colonization, in my personal opinion, no, this is not an opinion. French colonization is way worse than the British. Oh, wait, 100% worse. You can quote what I said. But it's funny how the French, like, didn't treat the natives bad. They didn't treat Native Americans bad. If anything, it was the British, later on Americans, because after Americans got independence, the British kind of, like, changed their attitude towards the Native Americans. But it's funny how the French were very chill with the natives and didn't, like, treat them bad. Compared to everywhere else that the French went. Not like everywhere the French treated them bad. But still, compared to British colonization, French colonization is way worse.
Instead opting for a policy of neutral non-hostility towards the colonies. Next, the delegates' attention turned to a unified war strategy, which culminated in Benjamin Franklin's Albany Plan of Union. While the Plan of Union was approved by all of the colonial delegates, it was unanimously rejected by both the colonial legislatures and the Crown, much to Franklin's frustration. The former wanted more independence, and the latter felt it gave too much. Despite the setbacks, the Congress proved that cooperation between the 13 colonies was possible, even desirable. On September 8, 1760, New France surrendered to British Field Marshal Jeffrey Amherst, ending the war in North America. The American colonists celebrated their rivals' fall, especially since it meant expansion. Many colonies already had settlements west of the Appalachian Mountains, but they had been continuously raided by the French and their indigenous allies. However, with that threat gone, the formerly disputed territory, especially the Ohio River Valley, was now theirs for the taking. However, London felt differently. The earlier conquest of French Arcadia had resulted in extensive and costly guerrilla fighting, and the ongoing 7 Years' War was draining the exchequer. The last thing London wanted was another war. Thus, it needed to very quickly pacify the French Canadians and native peoples. Secondly, the conquest had brought all of the fur trade under British control. While this was a great victory, the fur trade relied on indigenous tribes bringing furs to traders. Without good relations, trade was impossible.
Okay, yeah. So I said this before. Like, the way how Americans were and Native Americans, I don't even think this is just like a British thing. I think this is just an American thing. Because I know at one, like, eventually, like, the British would change their attitude towards how they treated the freaking Native Americans when they initially controlled the 13 colonies.
Britain had always been able to cultivate partnerships with various native tribes by allying with the rivals of French-aligned tribes. That tool was now gone, and it was now entirely on the British to keep their Indian suppliers happy and protect the fur trade. Unfortunately for London, these goals were thoroughly undermined by Amherst, now the military governor of Canada.
Bro, it's crazy because I think Russian colonization, right? Because I know Russia, when they colonized freaking Siberia, they also used fur trade. But the way how they did it is they would send like Cossacks. They would send Cossack raiders to go and raid the native tribes, and then they would send other people to pretend that they were gonna help them, right? They're gonna help them with the so-called threat, even though it was the same people who was raiding and, you know, pretending, you know. And the way how they did that was they would be like, oh, yeah, we'll protect you from those so-called raiders if you give us fur, right? And, you know, the ignorant tribes, I'm not saying ignorant in a bad way, I'm saying ignorant, like, they didn't know that the raiders and this were the same exact people that were basically scamming them out of fur. It's like, damn, you should have used the Russian method of freaking colonization. It worked for them. But hey, everyone, again, this is why I said, dude, I see so many people saying, oh, British colonization is so bad, it's like so horrible. Dude, British colonization, dude, is the most tame out of them all. Like, you can't compare British colonization to like people like Portugal. The Spanish, hell no. Spanish, Spanish was definitely worse. I think, in my personal opinion, it would be like Spanish, then Portuguese. I don't know. French is also pretty up there. Wow. Tell me what you think.
Amherst insulted everyone, treating both the French Canadians and French allied tribes poorly. This, coupled with fears of further colonial expansion, ignited Pontiac's War in April 1763, led by the Ottawa chieftain Pontiac against the British. London finally realized that 156 years after Jamestown was founded, it would have to actually take the policy lead in North America. Preventing conflict was the first step. To this end, Parliament and King George III crafted a royal proclamation to allay the Indians' fears. Unfortunately, it wasn't ready until October 1763, too late to prevent Pontiac's War. However, it did allow Amherst's more conciliatory replacement, Thomas Gage, an opening offer in peace negotiations. The Proclamation of 1763 first established governments for the newly acquired territory in the Americas. Then it divided British North America into three pieces: the 13 colonies, French-speaking Quebec, and Indian Territory. British settlers were forbidden within Indian Territory, and the tribes' rights to their land were acknowledged. The official reason was to meet Pontiac's demand to respect Indian land. This wasn't actually true. London fully intended to expand British settlements in North America. However, it would be at London's direction, and only after securing the rights to do so through purchase from the tribes. Parliament.
So, based on what I'm hearing, London was being fair. That's what I'm getting at.
Just couldn't say that openly without angering the Indians, who they were trying to placate. The Proclamation of 1763 caused outrage in the colonies. It ignored their chartered land grants and effectively abandoned the colonial settlements that already existed beyond the Allegheny Mountains. Pontiac's War and fears of a French reconquest of Quebec necessitated the stationing of more troops in North America. Paying for this required new taxes, and since America would be the beneficiary, the Whig government of George Grenville decided to make the colonies pay. Its first attempt to do this was the Sugar Act of 1764, which was technically an update to an existing Navigation Act. This drew some protests from New England rum distillers, but like the act it replaced, most colonists simply ignored or dodged the tax. It would be the Stamp Act of 1765 that provoked actual anger. The Act required that all legal paper be purchased from London with a revenue stamp certifying its legality. Though a long-standing tax in Britain, this was the first direct tax placed on any American colonies. It was first announced in April 1764, but not enacted until March 1765. This proved disastrous for Grenville's plan, as the delay in the Act's implementation allowed the colonies time to prepare to resist it.
Okay, so based on what I'm getting at here is Britain. This is so good, nigga. Oop, said bad word. Oh well, I'm black, so YouTube not gonna do me anything, bro. Based on what I'm getting at is that the British were passing this stuff to protect the 13 colonies, but the 13 colonies were being spoiled brats. That's what I'm getting at here. Keep in mind, these same acts were being passed in the Caribbean as well. Well, the British Caribbean. And they were being affected by it as well. So
the colonies learned of the Act's passing in early May 1764. By late May, every English-speaking colony from Nova Scotia to Jamaica made clear their intent to resist the tax. In the Caribbean, the strong Royal Navy garrison kept protests muted, though most ports refused to enforce the tax. However, the continental colonies all saw street protests, including the burning in effigy of both tax collectors and the Prime Minister. Boston saw the loudest protests. Beginning with peaceful street demonstrations organized by the nascent Sons of Liberty under James Otis and Samuel Adams, it quickly escalated to violence. Tax collectors were assaulted in the streets, their houses and offices attacked, and even the lieutenant governor was attacked and expelled from his official residence.
Nah, bro. Disrespectful. That could never be me. If that was me, and I'm a lieutenant governor, I'm sending in the troops. That is disrespectful.
However, it was New York that planned the most effective resistance to the Stamp Act. In addition to refusing to quarter British troops, the merchants organized a boycott of British goods, the coordination of which was the focus of the Stamp Act Congress in October held in New York City. It also sent a declaration of rights and grievances that would form the basis of colonial protests over the next 10 years. The declaration laid out the colonial position. Since they were English and guaranteed the rights and privileges thereof, they were only subject to taxation from elected governments. They didn't vote for Parliament, so it could not tax them. Moreover, they had natural rights as human beings, which were being ignored. These principles eventually became the continental rallying cry of no taxation without representation.
Okay, I agree with this one. I'm not gonna lie, I agree. In my personal opinion, I view the 13 colonies as traitors, right? I view them as traitors. I'm not gonna lie, I do view them as traitors. Like seriously, like I was talking about this with somebody else. We were basically talking about how the founding fathers were basically traitors to England and they all should have been hanged. But I do agree with that whole no taxation without representation. Okay, yeah, that's reasonable. But everything else was just a load of crap.
This declaration posed a huge threat to Parliament's plans, mostly because it was technically true. During the winter of 1764, as crisis loomed, Grenville claimed virtual representation solved the problem, for which he was ridiculed in Parliament and the colonies. This loss of credibility and news of the colonial protests led to the fall of Grenville's government in July 1765. While the colonies celebrated the Stamp Act's repeal, the next battle loomed. Simultaneous with the repeal, Parliament passed the Declaratory Act, stating that Parliament had the same powers in America as it did in Britain. Parliament intended to try again, and now Townshend had his personal reputation to save. Thus, beginning in 1767, the 5 Townshend Acts were passed. These acts were intended to raise revenue, tighten Parliament's control of trade, and punish New York for refusing to quarter troops. Once again, there were riots in Boston and widespread boycotts. At the Massachusetts Assembly's behest, numerous colonial legislatures began to send petitions to King George, asking him to intervene and protect their rights as Englishmen. The petitions went nowhere, as the king was firmly on Parliament's side. However, most alarming was the circular letter written by Otis and Adams and passed by the Massachusetts Assembly in February 1768, stating that Parliament was acting unconstitutionally in continuing to tax the colonies without representing them. It was sent to other legislatures to their approval. In response, the Colonial Secretary Lord Hillsborough ordered Massachusetts to withdraw the letter. When it refused, Hillsborough ordered the Assembly dissolved and sent 2,000 troops to occupy Boston that September. Tensions mounted.
Bro, do you hear what he says? He says occupy, right? They're not occupying anything. How can you occupy your own territory? They're enforcing it. This is why, like, dude, like you have to pay attention when these like history channels speak, especially these American ones, because they try to like give you this narrative, bro, this one-sided narrative, like occupying what? Like what? Okay, I'm gonna say that in my English accent. What? I'm not gonna say that in my American accent. I'm not freaking American. I'm freaking English. Like, how can you occupy your own territory? This is so stupid. This stupid freaking narrative right here, man.
Mounted for the next year and a half, especially in occupied and resentful Boston. On the night of...
How is it occupied? Oh no, the colonists can't do illegal work, guys. No! Again, stupid American narrative.
March 5th, this resentment boiled over. A guard on duty outside the custom house got into an argument with a wig maker's apprentice, eventually hitting him with his musket. This caused onlookers to begin harassing the guard. The crowd kept growing, and he retreated up the steps and called for help. Captain Thomas Preston soon arrived with 7 soldiers and ordered the crowd of several hundred to disperse. Instead, the crowd started throwing snowballs, rocks, and insults at the soldiers. Then innkeeper...
Okay, so basically the crowd began assaulting the guards who were legitimately there, right? Wow, guys, such an innocent, peaceful demonstration, am I right? I mean, granted, the guard assaulted him first, right? But still, like, the new guards, like, they didn't even do anything wrong, and you're telling me that these people are assaulting them?
Richard Palms, carrying a cudgel, approached Preston, asking if the soldiers' muskets were loaded. Preston said they were, but they'd only fire on his order. Just then, a missile knocked down Private Hugh Montgomery. Dazed, he retrieved his musket, shouted, "Damn you, fire!" and fired. Palms then swung his cudgel at Montgomery, hitting his arm, then at Preston, also hitting his arm. After a pause, the rest of the soldiers opened fire. 3 Americans died instantly, and 2 more would die of their wounds. Both sides called for reinforcements, and a full riot seemed imminent. Order was only restored when the governor himself arrived at the custom house and promised an investigation. A trial ultimately resulted in 2 soldiers being found guilty of manslaughter. News of the incident spread like wildfire and was immediately used as anti-Parliament propaganda, with Paul Revere's engraving calling it the Boston Massacre the most well-known. The propaganda worked, and anti-Parliament sentiment spread rapidly.
Okay, he's calling it propaganda, alright? Okay, at least he's not freaking saying that, oh, yeah, the news spread that the freaking British freaking massacred the innocent civilian population. Okay, so he's being a little bit fair.
By coincidence, on the same day as the massacre, the recently appointed Tory Prime Minister, Lord North, repealed most of the Whig Townshend Acts, citing lack of revenue they generated. However, he kept the tax on tea and the Boston garrison intact, and further signalled to the colonies that this was the new status quo. Parliament was done backing down. In response, the colonies continued organising. The Committees of Correspondence, first set up by the Sons of Liberty to coordinate opposition to the Stamp Act, became more active and spread to more colonies. However, 1771 and 1772 were otherwise quiet, and it looked like the conflict might be allowed to burn out. However, Lord North wasn't finished.
Okay, I don't know what the hell that was. Okay, so basically, what I'm getting at, right, is that because keep in mind, this is from like the perspective of like rich people, bro. You think poor people care about this stuff? No, dude, they're peasants, fam. They don't care, right? They don't give a damn. They could care less, right? Bro, this is just a perspective of rich people, and honestly, I heard somewhere that the 13 colonies, like when they rebelled, like, the only reason why they quote unquote rebelled was because the founding fathers, some of them were literally smugglers, and they just wanted free reign over their smuggled goods, and they just didn't like that the British were actually like enforcing freaking laws on their stuff. Like again, all I'm getting at is that a bunch of spoiled people don't like the fact that the parent is actually putting their foot down. Wow, so bad. I mean, come on. Like, did the standard of living drop because of any of this? No. Did anyone's lives got worse because of this? No. I mean, if you're rich and you are, smuggling left, right, and center, like what some of the founding fathers were doing illegally, by the way, sure, right? Let's continue.
In May 1773, the Tea Act was passed. Not a tax, it instead allowed the British East India Company the right to sell unlimited tea to the 13 colonies at a discount. However, the colonies saw it for what Lord North intended it to be, a ploy to get them to buy more tea, paying the tea tax, and implicitly accepting Parliament's right to tax them. This led nearly every colony to refuse tea to be landed in their ports. Boston went further again, with the Boston Tea Party on December 16th. This was the final straw for North, who decided that harsh action needed to be taken to put the colonies in their place. Massachusetts, and especially Boston, would be made an example. The fuse of revolution was now lit. At the next session of Parliament,
Whoa! The British are actually putting their foot down. No, how bad. No, terrible.
the five intolerable acts were passed. The first
Intolerable acts. Guys, listen to it, okay? Pay attention. Intolerable. Bro, how much you want to bet this is not going to be intolerable at all? Let's see.
Four, called the Coercive Acts, all directly punished Boston, closing the city port, placing it under military governance, allowing officials to try anyone in British courts rather than local ones, and requiring more extensive troop quartering. To enforce these acts, General Gage was appointed governor of Massachusetts and ordered to consolidate his garrisons in Boston and move his headquarters there, which was accomplished in May 1774. This would not produce the results London intended. Gage had been stationed in North America since 1755, only occasionally returning to Britain, and was quite sympathetic to the colony's grievances. He would try to separate his duties as governor from his duties as an occupier, to little effect. It was the Fifth Act that would prove most damaging to Britain's hold on the colony.
I read those acts and I see nothing wrong. It's all completely justified. What the British did is literally justified. I don't understand.
Unrelated to the Coercive Acts, but passed at the same session, the Quebec Act outraged all parts of colonial society, even Parliament's strongest defenders. To placate the Canadians, the Act restored rights to Catholics in Quebec, allowed the use of French civil law, and most importantly, expanded Quebec's borders to include the Ohio River Valley, forever denying it to the American colonists. This was seen as a complete betrayal, and drove many previously moderate Loyalist Americans towards the Sons of Liberty and the Patriot camp. On September 5th,
Okay, yeah. Yeah, but why did they do it, right? Like, why? I don't know why the British did it, but why would they do it? Like, he's just saying that, oh yeah, the British did it. But why? He didn't even tell us why. Like, come on. Again, the narrative, dude. Like, he's just saying, oh, yeah, the colonists felt betrayed. He's just freaking giving us a stupid narrative.
delegates from every colony but Georgia met in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress. After first issuing the Declaration of Rights, They agreed to resist the intolerable acts via a complete boycott of British imports, and to pressure the West Indies colonies to do the same. Congress then adjourned with an agreement to reconvene the next year if their grievances weren't addressed. The boycott quickly put enormous pressure on Lord North to back down. However, with the king solidly behind him, North refused to budge, even as British exports to America plummeted. Whether the boycott could have worked will never be known, as events in Boston overtook everyone. Even before arriving in Boston, Gage realized that his position was impossible. He had roughly 3,000 soldiers in Boston, which was more than needed to keep order in a city of 16,000, but far too few to control the countryside. He was effectively trapped in Boston, and lacked the authority or resources to change his situation. He refused to actively oppress the population, but couldn't negotiate with them either. Instead, he hoped removing the colonists' ability to fight would reduce their resistance. On September 1st, 1774, Gage dispatched 260 soldiers to seize the Powder House, the largest gunpowder magazine in Massachusetts, a few miles northwest of Boston. After capturing and removing the powder without resistance, a contingent stopped in Cambridge to seize 2 cannons. The next day, a crowd of thousands of militiamen swarmed Cambridge, acting on rumours of British regulars attacking Boston and worse. This forced several prominent loyalists to flee into the city for military protection. As facts became clearer, the militia dispersed, with Gage understandably perturbed by the swiftness and scale of the response. He didn't know that he was under constant surveillance by the Sons of Liberty, now led by Dr. Joseph Warren. He soon learned that other colonies were moving their militia stores further inland, away from his reach. Massachusetts militia also moved their unseized cannons out of Boston to Concord, and began looking for more powder to replace the lost stores. Realizing the situation, Gage resolved to take no further provocative action. Unfortunately, Parliament had contrary plans. In February 1775, King George declared before both houses of Parliament that a state of rebellion existed in Massachusetts. Immediately afterwards, Secretary of State William Legge ordered Gage to quash the rebellion, disarm the militia, disband the Massachusetts Assembly, and arrest their leaders. How was left to Gage's discretion, but it was to be done as quickly as possible. In the next episode of our History on the American Revolution, Paul Revere will go on his midnight ride, and Continental militias will clash with the British at Bunker Hill.
So basically, bloody hell, that hurt my teeth. Yeah, basically, notice what he says, right? He says, oh yeah, King George says that the colonists were rebels. Yeah, he didn't view the colonists as nothing else but just rebels, and even though he's like painting out Gage as this good guy, right? Bro, they were literally rebels, okay? Like armed men, just that aren't even in the freaking army, just pulling up. Completely justify what the British did. It's completely justified. Most of what the British did was completely justified. I say what I said. Thank you for watching. Check out these videos that are going to appear on your screen soon. I'm going to be reacting to this whole entire series. So if you want to see that, subscribe. If you want to see my other history reactions, check out my channel. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.